A woman sits across from her husband at dinner. He's smiling, talking about his day. Nothing is wrong. She feels sick, not anxious, not paranoid, something deeper. A cold animal certainty, the kind that lives below thought. 3 weeks later, she finds out he'd been lying for months. She couldn't tell you how she knew, just that her body knew first. Now here's what neuroscientists found when they studied people like her, people raised by emotionally unpredictable parents, people who grew up scanning faces before they could read words. Their amygdalae don't just process threat, they hunt for it. Continuously, unconsciously, at a speed conscious thought can't touch. 80% of communication is nonverbal. Most people absorb maybe a fraction of it. These people absorb all of it. A micro-expression lasting 1/25th of a second. A vocal pitch drop of 3 Hz. A blink held half a beat too long. They catch it. Every time. Psychologists have a clinical name for what built this ability. It isn't giftedness. It's called hypervigilance. And it was forged inside homes, where reading the room wasn't a social skill. It was how you stayed safe. Your brain has a security system. It runs 24 hours a day. It never clocks out. And in most people it hums quietly in the background, scanning, filtering, occasionally flagging something as worth your attention. In people raised under emotional unpredictability, that security system didn't just activate. It got rebuilt from the ground up. Here's the mechanics of how that happens. Deep inside your brain sits the amygdala. 2 almond-shaped clusters of neurons, whose entire job is threat detection. When something feels off, a wrong tone, a tense jaw, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the amygdala fires before your conscious mind has even registered the input. We're talking milliseconds, faster than a blink. In a stable childhood, this system stays calibrated to genuine threats. A stranger, a loud noise, real danger. But in a home where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where silence meant something, where laughter could precede punishment, where "I love you" and cold withdrawal lived in the same week, the amygdala learns a different lesson entirely. Everyone is a potential weather system. Watch them constantly. Martin Teicher at Harvard spent decades scanning the brains of adults who experienced childhood emotional unpredictability. What he found was structural, not metaphorical. The limbic system, the emotional processing core of the brain, showed measurable differences in size, connectivity, and reactivity. The threat detection network had physically expanded to meet the demand placed on it during development. Think of it like a muscle. Except this muscle was forced to train 8 hours a day, every day, for the first 18 years of life. The prefrontal cortex, the rational, decision-making brain sitting just behind your forehead, gets pulled into this system too. In most people, the prefrontal cortex acts as a brake on the amygdala. It steps in and says, "Calm down, this isn't actually dangerous." But when the amygdala has been firing on overdrive since childhood, that brake wears thin. The emotional alarm rings faster and louder than reason can respond to. The result is a person who processes social information at a fundamentally different speed than their peers. Stephen Porges, a neuroscientist at Indiana University, calls this the body's neuroception, a below-conscious process that scans the environment for safety and danger using cues most people never consciously register. Vocal prosody, facial muscle tension, the rhythm of someone's breathing, the stillness in a room before something bad happens. People raised in emotional chaos don't just have sharper neuroception. Their neuroception became their primary language. While other kids were learning to read words, these kids were learning to read people. Every flicker of the eye, every half-second pause before an answer, every laugh that had just a little too much effort in it. By adulthood, this processing is completely automatic. They don't decide to analyze you, they already have. Before the handshake is finished, comment a search emoji below if you've ever just known something was wrong before you could explain why. Your nervous system doesn't know what year it is. It doesn't know you're an adult now, that you have your own apartment, your own income, your own front door you can lock from the inside. It only knows one thing: the rules it learned when it was being built. And the rules it learned were written by evolution long before the 1980s, long before parenting philosophies, long before tough love became a cultural badge of honor. Here's where it starts. 50,000 years ago, the most dangerous thing a human child could encounter wasn't a predator. It was an unpredictable caregiver, a parent who disappeared, a parent whose moods shifted without logic. Because without that caregiver, the child didn't survive. Full stop. No food, no shelter, no protection from the actual predators circling outside. So the developing brain evolved a ruthlessly logical solution. If the person keeping you alive is unpredictable, make understanding them your entire neurological priority. John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who founded attachment theory, documented this in the 1950s and 60s. Children don't attach to caregivers because caregivers are safe. They attach because attachment is survival. And when that attachment figure is emotionally inconsistent, warm one moment, withdrawn the next, loving on Tuesday and punishing on Thursday, the child's nervous system doesn't conclude the caregiver is dangerous. It concludes that it isn't watching carefully enough. This is the cruelest trick evolution ever played. The child turns the surveillance inward and outward simultaneously, scanning themselves for what they did wrong, scanning the caregiver for early warning signals, building an internal model of human behavior that is exquisitely sensitive to inconsistency, concealment, and emotional misdirection. Now fast forward to the 1980s. Tough love wasn't cruelty in most homes. It was a philosophy. Boys don't cry. Feelings are indulgent. You don't need a hug. You need discipline. Emotional expression was treated like a structural weakness, something to be engineered out of a child before the world found it and exploited it. What this created, unintentionally, was a mass experiment in emotional suppression. Children who needed emotional attunement, whose brains were literally under construction and required consistent emotional feedback to calibrate properly, instead learned to operate in an environment where emotions were hidden, where adults said one thing and felt another, where the gap between expressed and actual reality was a daily landscape they had to navigate. The amygdala filed every lesson. The modern conflict is this: that ancient threat detection system, perfectly designed for a world of genuinely unpredictable dangers, now runs inside office buildings, inside marriages, inside friendships where nobody is actually trying to hurt anybody. It reads a colleague's hesitation as deception, a partner's distraction as withdrawal, a friend's cancelled plan as quiet rejection. The system isn't broken. It's just still fighting a war that ended decades ago. This isn't theory. The data exists, and it's striking. In 2010, a team of researchers at the University of California, Berkeley ran a study on emotion recognition in adults who reported emotionally unpredictable childhoods. Participants were shown photographs of human faces displaying micro-expressions, fleeting emotional signals lasting less than 1/4 of a second, too fast for most people to consciously process. The group raised in emotionally inconsistent environments didn't just perform better than the control group. They performed significantly better, identifying concealed fear, suppressed anger, and masked sadness at rates that made the researchers run the numbers twice, 1/4 of a second. They were catching signals in 1/4 of a second. Judith Orloff, a clinical psychiatrist at UCLA, has spent years documenting what she calls emotional empaths, people whose nervous systems process the emotional states of others almost like a physical sensation, a knot in the stomach when someone nearby is anxious, a heaviness in the chest when someone is concealing grief. In her clinical population, the overwhelming majority traced this sensitivity back to childhoods spent reading emotionally unavailable or unpredictable parents. Their bodies learned to feel other people's hidden states before their minds could name them. Then there's the cortisol data. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. It floods your system when your brain perceives threat. In most adults, cortisol spikes in response to clear, present danger, then drops once the threat passes. In adults with hypervigilant nervous systems, researchers at the University of Wisconsin found something different. Cortisol levels stay chronically elevated, not because something dangerous is happening, but because the threat detection system never fully powers down. It is always listening, always scanning, always preparing for the storm it learned to expect. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, whose landmark research culminated in his book on trauma and the body, documented this in clinical detail. The body keeps a biological record of every environment it has ever had to survive. Long after the environment changes, the body's responses remain calibrated to the old one. His patients, many of them raised in emotionally chaotic homes, showed physiological threat responses to completely neutral social situations. A raised voice in the next room, a long pause in a conversation, a face that went momentarily blank, neutral inputs, full alarm response. But here is the data point most people overlook. A 1998 study by researchers at the University of New South Wales tested adults across a range of professions for micro-expression detection ability. The highest scorers weren't psychologists. They weren't law enforcement. They were people who, when interviewed afterward, consistently described childhoods defined by emotional unpredictability and the need to read the room to stay safe. They had been training for decades without knowing it. Comment a magnifying glass below if you just realized your childhood was basically an involuntary FBI training program. PHAs 3, The Deep Dive Section 5, The Plot Twist. Here is what nobody tells you. Every therapist, every self-help book, every well-meaning podcast episode frames hypervigilance as damage, as a wound to be healed, a malfunction to be corrected. And there is real suffering in it, the chronic exhaustion of a nervous system that never rests, the relationship strained by a threat detector that misfires in safe spaces. But that framing is incomplete, and the data says so, because the same neural architecture that keeps you scanning for danger also does something else entirely. It makes you extraordinarily good at understanding people. Francesca Happe at King's College London has studied what researchers call social cognition, the brain's ability to model the internal states of other humans, to understand not just what someone is saying, but what they actually mean, what they want, what they fear, what they're hiding. People with hypervigilant nervous systems don't just score higher on emotion recognition tests. They score higher on theory of mind assessments, the ability to accurately model another person's perspective, motivation, and hidden emotional state. They are faster, more accurate, and more nuanced in their social processing than their peers who grew up in emotionally predictable environments. This isn't a consolation prize. This is a genuine cognitive advantage. Look at the professions that require this skill at the highest level. Hostage negotiators. Their entire job is reading a person in extreme emotional concealment, someone who is terrified, volatile, and actively trying to project control. The FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit has documented that their most effective negotiators share a common biographical thread: childhoods that required them to manage the emotional states of unpredictable adults, therapists. The ability to sit with a patient who is saying one thing while feeling another, and to gently, accurately close that gap, is the core skill of effective clinical work. Alice Miller, the Polish-Swiss psychologist, wrote extensively about what she called the gifted child, the child who became exquisitely attuned to parental emotional states as a survival strategy, and who often carried that attunement into careers built around understanding others. Negotiators, actors, detectives, writers who create psychologically precise characters, leaders who can read a room and shift their approach in real time. The thread running through all of them is the same nervous system, the same rebuilt amygdala, the same childhood spent doing involuntary graduate-level work in human behavior. There is something else the research surfaces that almost nobody talks about. A 2017 study published in the journal Psychological Science found that people who experienced moderate emotional unpredictability in childhood, not severe abuse, but inconsistency and emotional suppression, showed superior performance in fast-changing social environments. Environments where the rules kept shifting, where reading people quickly and accurately determined outcomes. In other words, the modern workplace, modern negotiation, modern relationships where people rarely say exactly what they mean. The nervous system built to survive emotional chaos turns out to be surprisingly well suited to navigate a world full of it. The wound and the weapon are the same thing. The question has never been whether this ability is real. The question is whether you are running it consciously as a tool you choose to deploy, or whether it is running you, firing automatically, treating every safe room like a minefield, exhausting you with intelligence you never asked for and can't turn off. That distinction is everything. And it's exactly what the final section is about. You cannot unlearn what your nervous system spent 18 years building, and you shouldn't want to. What you can do is something more precise, more useful. You can learn to drive the system instead of being driven by it. To pick up the signal without drowning in the noise. To use the radar without living inside the radar station. Here is how. Exercise 1. The gap audit. Your hypervigilant brain fires an alarm. Someone's tone shifted. A colleague went quiet. Your partner gave a one-word answer. The alarm is already ringing before you've consciously registered the trigger. Most people at this point do one of two things. They either act on the alarm immediately, confronting, withdrawing, catastrophizing, or they suppress it entirely, overriding the signal with logic until it builds into something they can't contain. Both responses waste the data. Instead, do this. When you feel the alarm fire, pause and ask one question. What specifically triggered this? Not what you fear it means. What you actually observed. A vocal tone drop, a delayed response, a micro expression you caught and filed. Write it down if you have to. One sentence. the observable fact stripped of interpretation. This single act does something neurologically significant. It activates the prefrontal cortex, the rational brain, and pulls it into a conversation with the amygdala instead of letting the amygdala broadcast unchecked. You are not dismissing the signal, you are interrogating it, asking it to show its evidence before it issues a verdict. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. Your threat detection system learns that its signals will be heard and examined, rather than ignored or obeyed blindly. It becomes more precise, less reactive, more useful. Exercise 2. The body scan reset. Hypervigilance lives in the body before it reaches the mind. Tight chest, shallow breathing, a jaw you didn't realize you were clenching, shoulders that have been rising toward your ears for the last 40 minutes. Once a day, not during a crisis, during a calm moment, run a deliberate scan from the top of your skull to the soles of your feet. Not looking for problems, just taking inventory. What is held? What is braced? What is waiting for something that isn't coming? The goal is not relaxation. The goal is awareness. You are teaching your conscious mind to read your body's threat log in real time rather than discovering 3 hours later that you've been in a low-grade stress response since 9 in the morning. Peter Levine, whose work on somatic trauma therapy has influenced clinical practice for 3 decades, calls this pendulation, the deliberate practice of moving your awareness between areas of tension and areas of ease within the same body. The nervous system learns, gradually, that it can move, that it is not locked, that safety and tension can coexist without the tension meaning danger. Do this daily for 30 days. The research on interoceptive awareness, your ability to accurately read your own internal physiological states, shows measurable improvement in that window. You begin to catch your own alarm responses earlier, which means you have more time to choose what to do with them. Exercise 3. Deliberate safe signal collection. This is the one most people skip, and it is the most important. Your nervous system was trained on a diet of unpredictability. It learned, at a cellular level, that safety is temporary. That calm is the quiet before something shifts. That warmth has an expiration date you can't see. So even when you are genuinely safe in a stable relationship, a trustworthy friendship, a workplace that isn't hostile, your nervous system doesn't automatically update its threat model. It keeps running the old software, looking for the catch, waiting for the mask to slip. You have to manually feed it new data. Every day, identify 3 moments where safety was demonstrated and nothing bad followed. Not grand gestures. Small, specific, concrete moments. Your partner said they'd call at 7 and called at 7. Your friend kept a confidence you shared. Your body was tense in a meeting and the meeting ended and nothing happened. Write them down. Not as affirmations, as evidence. You are building a new case file. One your nervous system can consult when it starts running old threat predictions on new people. Rick Hansen, a neuropsychologist at UC Berkeley, calls this taking in the good, the deliberate practice of holding positive social experiences in conscious awareness long enough for them to encode into implicit memory. The brain, he notes, has a negativity bias baked in by evolution. It records threats automatically and immediately. It requires deliberate effort to record safety with the same fidelity. You are not being naive. You are rebalancing a system that was calibrated under conditions that no longer exist. Here is what all 3 exercises have in common. They do not ask you to become less perceptive. They do not ask you to stop reading rooms or catching signals or noticing the things nobody else notices. They ask you to add 1 layer on top of the system you already have. Conscious choice. The ability to catch a lie in 1/4 of a second is extraordinary. The ability to then decide calmly, deliberately, from a place of stability rather than alarm, what to do with that information, is what transforms a survival mechanism into an actual superpower. You spent your childhood building the most sophisticated human reading system most people will ever encounter. It's time to put yourself in the driver's seat. Magnifying glass. If this video described your experience, share it with someone who needs to hear that what they built in survival isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to understand. And if you want the full research breakdown, sources, studies, and clinical frameworks behind everything covered here, the link is in the description.